Okay. All right. So for today's meeting, I want to make sure that everyone has seen the meeting number 2 summary and if there's any questions or edits to the notes that we want to make. And then I think we just want to spend as much time as we need. We have the whole meeting to go through this draft framework document. I have a couple of potential questions of areas we could explore, or really just get your reactions. Is this on the right track? Maybe flesh out some of the places where there are blanks a little bit more. But that's what I was hoping we could do today. Does that sound like the right agenda?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's easy. Any questions, edits, comments about the meeting number 2 summary?
I am scanning it now.
I think it's captured well. Thank you.
That looks very detailed.
Great. Then let's go to the framework. Like I said, this is going to be a very efficient meeting. So at our last meeting, we had kicked around the idea of some sort of framework, logic model, something that sort of tries to bring the different dimensions together. So I spent some time playing with this. I tried a bunch of different options. I didn't like any of them. This was the one that seemed maybe the most cohesive. So let me, maybe Joanna, you want to pull the document back up and let me talk you through a couple of things and just pause for prompt questions. And then I really want to know what you think. And if this is not the right direction, I'm very open to scrapping it, going somewhere else. I don't know where, but this is why we have this group and looking for your guidance. So Johnny, can you zoom in a little bit? It's really small. Okay, so first page just lays everything out. At the bottom of the first page, highlighted in gray, there is one thing that I wanted to ask you about. Okay, and it's this, oh, sorry, it's the very last sentence there. It's, this framework is intended to provide direction and a menu of potential actions for consideration. The framework includes potential opportunities for a range of stakeholders, including the legislature, the advisory committee, OHA, health plans, and provider organizations. So when we were talking about this draft internally last week, one of my team members asked, is this document, is everything in this document assumed to be a prescription, as in all of these things should be implemented? And I wasn't thinking that was the direction we were going. I was thinking that this was more of a menu and a way to think about all the potential intersection points of where we could do a better job of integrating equity-related work or being more proactive throughout the whole program from all of the different parties. It doesn't mean that this is a recommendation that everything in here should happen or that we're going to do everything all at once. But I wanted to check that assumption. Maybe you think, maybe you feel differently. Maybe you do think everything in here is a recommendation and we should be doing it all. And it's not a menu of potential options. It's a, we should be working on all of these things.
I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gil.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Thank you. My initial reaction is that we don't know enough about our recommendations and if they're going to work, if they're like, so I'd be nervous about requiring anyone to do any of this until we know more, right? So that's one. The other is that, I mean, I think there's a difference, and we'll talk through it, but like when I looked at the tables below, there's kind of that current or past activities and future ones. And I think it's not that I think everyone needs to do all of the things that are in there, but I do think that we could say like there needs to be, using this framework, there should be a requirement to like do an analysis or look for opportunities or something. So I'm kind of split. I don't know if that made any sense.
I think it makes sense. I think you're saying we're not sure if this is the right thing. As we'll talk about in a minute, this is cutting edge. You know, nobody's out there telling us exactly how to do this. And so this might not be quite right, but something that there is some, not teeth to it. That's the wrong thing, but that it's not, this isn't just an academic exercise, that this document does drive action in some different way.
Yeah. And, or, you know, like, I think it's more the framework, and I don't know, for me, it's more like there's a table that shows a level of analysis and brainstorming that you need to do, right? And so the brainstorm that's actually in there, we don't know yet. It's not done. We haven't finished brainstorming, but there should be some attention paid to looking for ways to advance equity. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So maybe what I'm hearing, Michael, is that there should be a strengthening, although maybe it's captured in the guiding principles on the next part, but
probably, I think it is actually.
okay, cool. Gil, what do you think?
Yeah, I like the menu, and I think it also recognizes that there's going to be various levels of influence, that we can have on different parts of the system, and there already are, I'd say, encouraging activities or directions, with the CCOs and the collection of, more of a focus on collecting the real D SOGI kind of data and starting to look at that, in relation to our quality metrics and things like that. So it's this, I think, recognizes we may have a little more influence on, what happens with OHA or and try to insert this, into, the areas that are outside of that direct control, but stopping short of requiring, that on top of already this expectation or the target for the cost growth. So but I think the more that we can talk about these things together, so it isn't an afterthought, but it's through the lens, this framework, is something that is in tandem with our discussion of a cost growth target. And I think that would make me feel better in terms of the contribution of this committee and things to the whole, focus of equity, on this work.
Okay. I think what you were just saying about the not an afterthought is, for me, maybe also something that we want to add to the guiding principles. So maybe let's go there for a minute. Johnny, can you go to the next page, please? So when I looked back at the meeting 2 notes and conversation, I heard a number of things about the direction we want to go in that really felt like guiding principles to me. So that's how I packaged this all up. And I want to, again, check these with you. Are these the right ones? Are we missing anything? Is anything in here not fully representative or capturing the discussion from the last meeting? So the first bullet is that all entities involved have a shared responsibility to address this. So, and that's threefold: integrating equity into cost containment efforts, ensuring that actions taken to meet the target don't cause harm, and improving healthcare affordability. So a little bit more of that proactive side. So 1 is shared responsibility. 2, this is innovative work. We might get this wrong, but we need to do something anyway. 3, equity is not an afterthought. It should be integrated from the beginning. So maybe Gil, that's sort of what you were saying a few minutes ago. It's already sort of built in. Jordy, please scroll down a little bit. The 4th bullet is taking a proactive approach is required, is necessary. Neutral continues to perpetuate harm. And then not every cost containment policy or strategy is a direct contribution to advancing health equity, but some actions or strategies might be more foundational or infrastructure that will support further change. So this is what I think I heard. How do you feel about these? How do you feel about these principles?
Yeah, I like them. I think that it does capture the discussions that we've been having, and it is it doesn't seem like it should be such cutting edge work, but it does, but it is, from what we can see, there aren't a whole lot of blueprints on how to do this, so I think like what Michael was saying, some of it is we're gonna have to see what rises to the top as the most encouraging activities and ways to address this, that we can maybe then raise up in later iterations of this, but I don't think we have nobody has the silver bullet at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't think, I think we're learning that there isn't a silver bullet. It's probably like a bunch of them. But I definitely agree with these. I think the one thing that comes to mind, and it's not directly related to your question, but it's just something that I'm not sure where we tackle this or if we tackle this, is that I think at some point we need to make sure that we're on the same page around what it means to address disparities versus advancing health equity versus, health inequities. They're all slightly different, right? And I think I find that we kind of confuse or use them interchangeably. And so addressing disparities is a very different thing than advancing health equity, right? In some ways, or addressing inequities. And so, and I'm not sure how that plays out in the cost containment necessarily. So again, I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I don't know if that lands anywhere for anybody. And I don't know if addressing that in this document makes sense, or if it's more just something we need to make sure we're digging into as we think about this moving forward.
I think it's worth calling out. I mean, I think it's part of this, right? We have the definition for health equity, but I think it might be worth having a mini glossary of those three things, because I think from my perspective, it would be okay if there are strategies and suggestions throughout this framework that address all three of those, but they are different.
They are different, yeah.
So maybe we should define them and then just make sure we're not using the language interchangeably when we don't mean to be. I would be in support of adding that in.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, I do think it's it is addressing all three of them, but it's more definitely not just addressing one of them. Just addressing the disparity isn't going to get at, it's, yeah, I don't know, but yes, you got it.
Michael, do you have a working, is there a definition or a resource for the separating those three out that you like that as or have as a go-to?
I don't, not yet. I do know that about a year ago, OEI, or now Equity Inclusion Division, was at least trying to distinguish between addressing inequities and disparities. Right. And so I think we should try to align as much as possible within. Similar to and I don't, this is why I'm getting confused, because I also know there's different parts of the state that are trying to move away from the term stakeholders. And so I don't know if we should scrub this document for that as well.
Yeah, there is an OHA style guide that I did not check this against. You're absolutely right.
Great. And we can do that step later. But yes, I would follow up with I know Maria sometimes during season meetings.
Yep. I'll follow up with Maria.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And I know I saw I follow a bunch of health services researchers on Twitter, and I know that I saw some recent slides from a presentation someone was giving that talked about some of these. So I might try to dig that up too, because if there's anything out there that could be helpful as a resource.
Yeah. And I do know just that one of the potential priorities or focuses of the Health Equity Committee might be to support the kind of development of a glossary related to this work, or even a rules chapter at some point. And so just we should connect that loop if we come up with that before they do. Yeah.
Great. And I think I would also, because this is a sort of, I would view this as a living document, recognizing that this is an evolving body of work. And so maybe it's this is our working definition. If and when the Health Equity Committee adopts this formally, will, align with their formal adoption.
You could even make that a guiding principle or whatever. We often will say, we know this work and the language around it evolves and we'll continue to learn and grow or whatever, and that will allow for that or something.
Yep. Okay, great. I love all of that. Gail, any thoughts or reactions to what Michael was sharing?
Well, I was just thinking about um, how this work fits with what other parts of the state are trying to do because this obviously isn't the only place that we're talking about health equity, but we're talking about it from this sort of vantage point from the cost growth target, you know. But there may be things like that, the legislature and others are working on to improve coverage, and there's like the work on the bridge or the basic plan. And so that how is that going to also, advance this health equity goal that we have? So I think maybe this is called out in the guiding principles, but it's more about, we're not like assuming, all of the work on health equity is going to kind of be driven through the cost growth target
Right. Yep.
effort, but it's like how do uh, how do how does the work that the cost growth target really promote and integrate and complement the other work that is going on throughout the state to advance health equity. And maybe that's what's called out in the first bullet. But
I actually think it's a new principle. I'd love to state that explicitly because I think this is something that there's a little bit of challenge where you put something like this together and everyone starts saying, but what about? And I
yeah,
think actually stating that this is not an exhaustive framework of all strategies to advance health equity in all areas statewide is valuable. This is very specifically about that intersection of the cost growth target.
mm,
And that there are lots of strategies that are related or complementary, but that we might not be calling out. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't happen or that we don't support them, but this is a very specific look.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that.
Okay, so a couple of edits to the principles, working on maybe a little bit more of the glossary to separate out those three um, concepts, terms. Plus, in the next draft, I will review this against the OHA style guide.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next page then. Okay, so let me just walk you through how this is laid out. And again, I am very open to feedback. It felt like there were just too many dimensions and I wasn't sure how to best present it. So the way the document is currently organized is there are these categories that are chunked out under the blue headers related to the different parts of the cost growth target program cycle. So all the different components of the cost growth target program work. Then there are these tables. The left column is things that we have already done or are currently doing. The right is things that we could do. So additional strategies, additional policy options, things like that. It's then stratified by different actors involved in the program. So the legislature, OHA/state agencies, the advisory committee, and then the payers and the provider organizations. And I will say that there are a lot of blanks here, particularly for the payer and provider organization. And one of the things that I'd love to get your reactions to as we go through today is where do we think there's opportunities for payers and provider organizations? And I think a lot of this might be more of like on a voluntary basis. And there might not be. I also think that it's okay if there are some blanks in these tables. Like there might not be, like maybe payers haven't done anything in the past at this very specific intersection of implementing and designing the cost growth target program and equity, and that's okay. Maybe we don't think that there's a role for payers in the future, for example. So I don't think every single table, every single cell in these tables needs to have something in it. But I also am recognizing that as we were drafting this, I didn't have a lot for payers and providers, and I wanted to have more of a discussion before we started building out that layer of this. Any questions or reactions to how this information is organized?
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I would, the payers and providers, yeah, I'm like, I don't know, I feel like we'd have to engage them, like, to figure out what past and current activities and also potential activities they could do. I think it's sort of arranged in kind of a current state, future state in some ways.
Hmm.
Or maybe maybe the future state is missing and it's got current state, potential activities, but not a future state. And I don't know if there's um, yeah, I don't know if we know the potential activities to get us there, but maybe we can come up with a future state. I don't know. I don't know if that
Okay.
makes sense. Um,
Well, on this one in particular, you know, the first one about representation and, you know, on the committee structure and governing bodies, I think we've already done a pretty good job, you know, in current state of trying to get diverse viewpoints, you know, from not just payer and providers, but also other key advocates and, you know, community members from looking at from a consumer or patient, you know, perspective. And so I think kind of my sense is more of the same, you know, that just kind of making sure that that is.
Can I make a suggestion that maybe blends this? Because I think for me, some of the value in this is having it at the activity level where there actually are specifics. And you could say, like, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pick 3 things off this list to go do this year. And so the future state almost feels more like a vision document, and that feels less helpful because then once you have the vision, then you need to go think about what the activities actually are to implement. But we started providing these little like blurbs, the italics under each header in the blue box. And so maybe there's some modifying of that so that the language in italics is the future state. Like we in the future, in an ideal state, we have representation, we
yeah.
have alignment, like that's where the vision goes, and then then the table is still activities focused.
Mhm.
Would
Yeah,
that blend what you're saying, Michael?
I think so. It's just also, I think, and again, this is we're all learning this together, but I think there's that bit of like, so aligned with best practices for data justice. I think we don't know what that looks like. And so how do we come up with potential activities? Right? Necessarily, like I don't think everyone understands what that means, and if we're all on the same page. And so that's why I was like, well, maybe having some kind of future state might be helpful so that we know what we're striving towards.
Okay.
The other thing that, and I don't know if this, I'll throw it out there, and this may not fit or make sense, but sometimes I like to do this thing with like potential activities where, um, and so it might be a tool that we give to go with this, where it says like, if we value this, or like if we're going to continue to implement real D and SOGI standards for data collection and reporting where possible, we expect this to be the result, and this is how we're going to know, and it somehow gets it a little more concrete, because you can take just kind of this thing and put it into action, like, because we value this, we're going to do this, this is what we expect outcomes, and this is how we're going to measure and evaluate it. I don't know if that is a useful next step for any of these potential activities, or a recommendation that people try to figure that out for those potential activities.
Yeah, and I think this gets back to like, is this more of a logic model,
Right.
like
Yeah.
content? And so I like the idea of maybe rewriting the potential activity statements to have the results or to have the outcomes. I think how we measure and evaluate it, I would want to hold that almost for a phase 2. So like, think about where we're going with this. We, as a work group, we're going to come up with this draft framework. We're going to bring it back to the full advisory committee. They're going to have feedback.
Mhm.
At some point, we then might say, all right, as a committee, we're going to take our committee row and prioritize these 3 things for the
Mhm.
next year. And so then maybe we get to implementation,
Yeah.
and then there's like the implementation guide of how we measure and evaluate those things. Like, it feels maybe a little premature to try to put some of those in here, but I'm also that's just knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so content here, this isn't necessarily about the program cycle, every year itself, but I did think it was important to have some sort of program infrastructure, sort of continuous quality improvement efforts. So this is where we have the committee representation work, we have the work group, us, our body of work. We have the RealD SOGI work for the agency. There's some things for the committee to do. I don't know that there's anything. When I looked back, I actually reread all of the legislation establishing the program. Equity, disparities, and equity, none of those terms were used in the establishing legislation. So I don't think there were really any past activities there. I don't know that we want potential legislation about the program design at this point. I think I don't know if there's something to fill in that row. And for payers and providers, they participate in the technical advisory group, they give feedback, they participate in the committee. That's sort of their role as it relates to program design and sort of the administering of the cost growth target program. So again, I don't know if there's a lot there. I think there's a lot more when we get to like measuring and reporting and analysis that payers and providers can do, but that's sort of in the other categories.
So the indicator, or I'm thinking about the impact that cost has, particularly on low income people, and especially those who may be uninsured or underinsured. Where would that, do we have, first of all, a good indicator, a good measure about, so this is what cost really means for people at already a disadvantaged
Yeah. Yep.
starting point, and how do we track that and make that visible, so that can be a driving force for the work that happens here.
Yeah, actually, let me pivot a little bit. Let me actually walk you through everything in here, because some of this, there's like an artificial, like you have to when you put things on paper, it has to go somewhere, even though you could fit it under multiple different categories. So let me talk you through the full document and then come back. Because I think, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Johnny, can you go to the next page, please? So the next page is suspense, drum roll. The next page is about measuring performance relative to the cost growth target. So there are a couple of visionary, future state goals. So one, we would want all of our cost growth target measurement to be as representative, or not representative, but include as much of the population of Oregon as possible. So we're not leaving anybody out of whose costs we're measuring. So that includes some specific spending that we're doing. So Veterans Affairs, Department of Corrections. We know we have some future work around engaging with tribes, around tribal data. We don't currently have Oregon State Hospital data. We want to get that. We also don't have a lot of self-insured plan data. So we could continue to work with payers to get self-insured data, so that all of that would be part of what we're measuring. So that's sort of the technical, like who's in. Maybe another thing not on this list actually that's occurring to me is we're not currently measuring costs for people who are uninsured. And so that's a gap, and we should maybe explore, an activity could be exploring ways to do that. So that's measurement. Next page. The next one is then analyzing that data. So we've collected the data, we're measuring cost growth, and then we're understanding cost trends and cost drivers. So this is where we could be monitoring for inequities or disparities. This is where we could be bringing in that measure of what cost really means for people. So Gil, in the cost growth target literature, such as it is, that's sort of referred to as affordability standards. And there are a number of different measures of an affordability standard that are in use that we can incorporate into our work. There are policy activities related to affordability standards. So for example, Rhode Island has an affordability standard that they apply as part of their insurance rate review. And if an insurance plan's premium rates are going to be high enough in a way that they would impact affordability as they measure it to their affordability standard, they don't approve that. They have to meet these affordability standards. So there could be some legislative action that we would want to recommend or pursue related to that. There's a lot that we could do in the analysis to continue to identify what this really means for people. What are the negative impacts of efforts that are that payers and providers are taking to meet the cost growth target? So sort of that former unintended consequences body of work. Measuring investments in health-related social needs, which could be more of the advancing equity proactive work. There's a lot of work, scroll down a little bit more, please, Johnny. There's a lot of work that the payers and providers could be doing internally. So they could be understanding their own populations. They could be analyzing cost drivers, gaps, inequities in their own populations. But I think there's a lot more here on measurement that could continue to be built out, including what does cost really look like for people? The cost growth target being kind of vague, and how do we make things more tangible? Next page, please. Okay. The next is reporting performance and analysis. So this has a lot to do with continuing to report all of those analyses from the previous table, reporting on affordability measures, continuing to improve communications for the program. So plain language, accessible materials, reports, public hearings. There is a legislative action maybe here. Some states have quality and or health equity targets in addition to their cost growth target. So it's essentially a quality measure benchmark, or they pick an equity measure and they set up target for that, and then they measure and report on that in parallel or as part of their cost growth target reporting. So we don't currently have that. We have it on sort of a voluntary, we're going to do this for monitoring, but we could make that part of the work more robust. We could say it's actually really important that we have quality measures, quality measure benchmarks. This is something the CCOs have. The CCOs have a large quality measure program. If we wanted to pursue this, that would be broadening it out. So potential opportunities for legislative action, lots of things that the state and the committee can do. Let's scroll down a little bit more, please. Payers and providers definitely need more discussion here about what their role might be in reporting. Next page. Sorry, I know I'm going really fast, but just give you the overview. Okay, accountability. So again, this is something my team flagged when we were discussing this, that there's also an opportunity to incorporate equity considerations into the accountability mechanism. So for payers and provider organizations who exceed the cost growth target without a good reason, they may be subject to performance improvement plans, financial penalties down the road. So how do we incorporate some of these considerations? That could look like having monitoring or balancing measures related to equity in the performance improvement plans. It could be related to how we set parameters for how financial penalties are used. So if the financial penalties are going to result in funds being collected somewhere, where do those dollars go? And can they be used to drive further investments in equity or to offset harms in some way? So I think there's a lot around sort of proactively designing the financial penalty use. Scroll down, next section. So then finally, all of this measurement, reporting, analysis, the goal of the cost growth target program is to then use all of that to identify opportunities to slow cost growth and then implement those to slow cost growth. So this is where it feels like the health equity impact assessment and other similar tools would be a very obvious recommendation. So any opportunities or strategies that are going to be recommended and implemented should go through some sort of health equity impact assessment process. It could be that there are legislative strategies that are specifically aimed at addressing healthcare cost growth in the commercial market or in other areas where we know that there are inequities or negative impacts of current activities. So we could want some very targeted legislative action to address problems. And then there's some ongoing monitoring. So, for example, we know we want to keep monitoring behavioral health spending. That's an area, a strategy where we actually want to see investment. And so we want to keep an eye on that more proactively. But again, needing to think more about what the payer and provider role is in this implementation component. So, okay, I'm gonna stop talking and see what y'all think. But like I said, it's a little bit hard to know sort of what bucket to put some of this work in. It could fit in multiple, um, but trying to think about throughout the life cycle of the cost growth target program, where do we have these opportunities? And this is the first stab. So where do you want to go from here?
So just a clarification, do we already have a health equity impact assessment tool to use?
I believe that, Michael, you were involved in piloting one, right, with the agency?
Yeah, so the HP Health Policy and Analytics Group has a draft tool that was used on the 1115 waiver. And I think they are now trying to figure out kind of next steps for how, you know, they spread it, do they modify it? You know, they did a pilot project, so there's lessons learned, and so there is a draft one, but that's about as much as I know yet. I don't know how it's going to be moved forward.
And I would say, and Michael, you know more about this than I do, but there are many health equity impact assessment tools out there that could be used. I mean, I think, is there like one true single tool that Oregon has adopted? Not yet, but maybe we're getting closer to that. But certainly we could pick one and say, this is what we're going to use for this purpose for, the next year.
Yeah. I mean, and there's, I mean, I think the one that's there now is, I mean, it's not a quick thing, and it may not, I think there might be like different versions of it that might be developed, right? So there's kind of the full process, which is really more about equipping staff with the skills and learning and all these conversations I have around this. And then there might be a smaller one just to kind of create a kind of report or almost like a dashboard on a policy for decision makers. Yeah.
Yeah. So like a scaled down version that maybe would be more appropriate for something like the advisory committee.
Yeah.
It is the tool suggested to be used at the provider level also, or at a payer level, or is it primarily at a policy level that we're thinking about it?
Yeah, I don't think there is a suggestion for who should use it outside of OHA just yet. It was designed pretty broadly, so it could be applied to policies, program, potential legislation development, quite a few different things. And so
so this
really
might be
tailored to Oregon and the state level, I think.
So I think actually to that point, I would add in the payer and provider org cells that payers and providers should use a health equity impact assessment tool to review any programs or changes that they plan to make internally. So the committee might say at a high level, and for example, the committee is currently talking about pharmacy strategies. So let's say that we're going to recommend as a committee by the end of the year 2 strategies that the state should advance. So legislative, state agencies across the board. So there would be sort of a committee health equity impact assessment report that goes along with that recommendation. But then we're saying payers and providers, you also might want to do things about pharmacy. Maybe you want to review your contracts with your PBMs payers. So is there a health equity impact assessment tool that they might use internally? So that's not the same as like what we might do and have a report and have it all be public, but certainly I think it makes sense to have a recommendation that payers and providers do some of this work internally as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe it's called out in the, that value-based pay compact group, because although equity is referred to, it's not really, I mean, you can kind of move through a value-based pay compact you know, the land construct and not really even talk about equity, you know, so really making that link that, and, you know, we want, you know, at the provider or payer level to be working through an assessment tool, equity assessment tool, as you're working your way through, you know, to 3A or 3B or, you know, whatever on the land construct. So I like that, you know, pulling in, you know, how this work relates to other activities that are going on in the state.
I think the other thing that came to mind, and it's up in one of the earlier tables, like maybe 2 or 3 pages up. It was around the monitoring of for negative.
Yeah, Journey, can you scroll up to the monitoring, to the measure, sorry, the analysis table? Yeah,
This one, yes. I mean, I think the monitoring for negative impacts is there, and I wonder, it's great, and I wonder if we should add something around monitoring for neutral or things that are not working like we thought. Like, there's one thing about like, oh, if it's doing negative, we need to address that. But there's also like, if we're taking action, we're making a recommendation because we think it's going to improve equity, and it's not doing anything negative or positive, then it should probably be something that's discontinued or something. And I don't know how to capture that in here, but well, it's kind of like looking for opportunities, monitoring for opportunities to advance. I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
It totally does. Yeah. Yep. I think,
I don't have the
and
language.
I think it fits in multiple places. I think there's some monitoring here of monitoring the outcomes, positive, negative, or non-existent of strategies. And then I think there's like something specific into the strategies or the implement strategies table about having an evaluation plan.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a lot. I'm still trying to absorb it, but I like it feels very tailored to our charge and our as a committee and our you know, by having it broken down by the different analyze spending, you know, so that's, I think, helpful. So it's a good start for us to figure out how to start to identify these opportunities.
Yeah, so let me ask you one more question and then maybe we wrap a little bit early, and I would love for you to, you know, spend some time marking this document up and share that back. Like, I really would love your thoughts. Like, this makes no sense, or I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that could go here. Any of that feedback in sort of a red line or track changes would be really helpful if you're willing to do that. But let me ask you, maybe at a higher level across all of these categories, about the payer and the provider activities. So for me, it's important that we do have some things here. I think we want to continue to convey that it is a shared responsibility and that payers and providers do have roles in this body of work. So I think there needs to be something. I think where it might get complicated is I don't know that it's one single recommendation that's going to be appropriate for all payers in each category. So if we say analyze spending, is there one action that we want all payers in the state to take? Or is it, here are a couple things payers could do, payers should do something, pick one. And I think I'm struggling a little bit with that, but I'm leaning more towards the pick one. Like, there might be multiple things, but because we've set up the cost growth target program to be so flexible, the whole, you know, early pitch for this body of work was there's a target. There are many ways to meet the target. Payers and providers have flexibility to do that. We're not going to come in and say you must do this one specific thing to get your costs under control. You need to do what's right for your patients, for your members, for your cost drivers, recognizing that that's all really different across the state. And so I think I want to pull that through to this and say there are lots of things, and, you know, your negative impacts or your what cost disparities might look like in one population or one part of the state might be different than in another. And so the strategies that you're taking to address that might be different, and that's okay. And in fact, that's more than okay, that's appropriate. But how do we convey that? Is what one, is that right to convey? Two, if it is, how do we do that? And three, what do you think? Like, is it better to have that more selection of things that payers and providers could do as long as they're doing something, or would it be more helpful to say, here's the single strategy, everybody should be doing this?
I like the menu approach again, because we don't have the answers, and there's a variety of things that people are doing that could help provide insight into this. I'm thinking about, from a provider standpoint, one of the things that we're working on is collection of SDOH, information, and then also thinking about, well, that's good. And maybe there's also thinking about it from more of a community level, as these community deprivation index, or SDIs, that may be more, could be more standardized, to use at a payer or, at a level, if we're thinking about risk adjusting, rates or things to take into consideration, poverty index, or something in the community. So thinking about a provider or payer group could, move forward with the collection of this kind of information to better understand the impact of costs, on your membership or your patient population. I like those things, and it seems consistent with already kind of a overall direction that, at least in the CCOs that you're seeing, there's seems to be a lot of momentum around doing this kind of thing.
Okay.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think I would support your initial thinking around, it's not, you have to do all these, but pick one, you should do something, but we should allow for that flexibility and regional tailoring. Similar, Gil, you said standardize, and it made me think about, back when I worked at another place that had a very complex structure, we used to talk about opportunities like, are we standardizing, are we aligning, are we centralizing? And there's like this idea of like, standardize, we're all going to do it the same way to get to the same outcome. Align, we have the same goal, but you can choose how you get there, right? And then centralize, like, it makes sense that this is done not at the out there level, but kind of at this hub level. And so there's something about that here too. Like, there might be some
Yes.
strategies that were like, yeah, no, this should totally be standardized. We should all do it this way. And there are going to probably be a lot more that are like, we're aligned where we're trying to get to, but how you get there is going to be different. And then maybe there are some things that are centralized that's like, this is a state level thing that needs to be done, our strategy.
Yeah,
And maybe
I
it's
love that.
a level of maturing too, because we can, like, with the even collection of SDOH, there's probably 12 different ways the groups are kind of going about doing that. So I can't say that there's one standard, way to do it. And so it's maybe more at an alignment level at this point, but in the future, maybe it's as standard as a CPT code or, ICD-10 code, but that's not where we are today.
Yeah, I really like that, Michael, and I think that might be important if we're going to add this sort of glossary, that we should add that in as well and use that, because I do think that, so looking at again where we are in this table, if we were to pursue a legislative strategy of affordability standards, that would be standardized. There would be an affordability standard set for the state. We would measure it the same way for everybody, and that would then be a new tool that we would have.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of aligned analysis that payers and providers could do to better understand a lot of this. And I think both of those things should be on the list.
Mhm.
But it's really helpful to clarify like which is
Where it
which.
should be, yeah. Yeah, agreed. Centralized, standardized, align. Which one is it?
Yep. Yep. Okay. This has been really helpful. I appreciate that you have not immediately said this is terrible and makes no sense. So that's great. It feels like we maybe are onto something here. I think I'm gonna wrap us up early unless you all want to keep talking about this, but I really love it if you were probably holding half an hour on your calendar for this meeting to keep going. So I would love it if you would take that 30 minutes and, review this and start writing up any feedback or marking up this document and plan on sharing that back with us maybe in 2 weeks so that we can work on an updated draft.
What is the next step? I mean, so this work group was kind of a short term. We had a couple meetings. So I have a couple questions. One, what is the kind of process for getting the rest of the work group? Because clearly there's more of us than here input. And then how and when are we bringing this back to the full committee?
We are on the schedule for the September advisory committee to present back.
Okay.
So I think scheduling, as you saw the many emails from Gerandi,
Yes.
scheduling has been really hard.
Yeah.
So what I think I would like to do is try to get one more meeting on the calendar in August or maybe early September with as many people as possible. So look for another round of scheduling emails. I'm sorry. But then I'm going to follow up with everybody individually and ask for feedback over email on this draft because I really do want to make sure we're hearing from everybody. But I think at this point, now that there's something to react to, we might be able to do a lot of that over email.
Okay, that's helpful.
I think I would have loved it if we could meet more times, but I think people's availability and then summer vacation, it's just proving really hard to get together. So I want to try for one more meeting. I think my ideal state would be we have an updated version of this document that continues to synthesize all of our thinking and is expanded a little bit more, maybe where necessary, that we then present back to the advisory committee in September and say, we did a lot of thinking about this. There's not a lot out there that we can go on, but here's a framework and it has roles and we hope it guides the work moving forward. And here's what we think that looks like for the committee. And then the work gets absorbed back into the broader. Does that sound right? I'm open. If you think we need to keep meeting as a work group, that we can do that too, but that's our current plan.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see immediate reason for us to keep meeting unless when we present it to the committee, the reaction is, something different, like go back and do it again. I do think that this work group might end up coming back in like 6 months or a year to be like, wait a minute, how's this working? Do we need to modify or something? But
I also, sorry, I should have mentioned, I sent this draft to Baylor Health. There are consultants that work with a number of cost growth target states, and they're the ones who wrote the white paper that we based some of this on that we talked about in our previous meeting. That white paper was very specifically just the state, so the OHA like rows in these tables. But I want their feedback and their thinking about how they might, anything that they might add. So I want to incorporate their feedback in the next draft as well.
great.
Okay, does feedback over email, reactions, questions, markup, whatever works for you in the next 2 weeks make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, is there anything else that either of you would like to share or raise today?
No, thanks for putting this draft together. I think it's a good step forward.
Yeah, thank you.
And Michael, to your earlier point, I will connect with Maria. She is on the list but wasn't able to come today. So I will make sure that we get some equity and inclusion staff feedback as well. And I don't know if this is something we'd want to bring back to the Health Equity Committee at some point, but I'll talk to Maria about that.
Yeah. Okay, great.
All right, then thank you so much. Happy Monday, happy summer, and look for another round of scheduling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.